Welcome to the panel room. Today we're discussing writing in different genres, but before we get started, let's go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with Jeanne.
Hey, I'm Jeanne Adams. I write paranormal romantic suspense, urban fantasy, and space adventure.
Perfect. Quincy?
My name is Quincy J. Allen. I bill myself as a cross-genre author. So I've written in short stories and novels, steampunk, horror, sci-fi, military sci-fi, Western, and mashes of all of those pretty much. And it's mostly because I don't like to get stuck in one thing. Perhaps it's a manifestation of ADHD. So that's what I do.
All right, perfect. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Lyons and Jade Lee. I've done over 60 books in all sorts of romance. So historical is my Jade Lee name, paranormal romance, sports romance, contemporary romance. My Where Geeks Save Wisconsin is gay paranormal romance. And, you know, I started out in screenwriting. So I do it all in the romance touchy-feely genre.
All right.
I once did a suite too.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I read a lot of different genres, so I ended up writing a lot of different genres. I write historical fantasy with romantic elements, science fiction adventure with Jeanne Adams, and romantic suspense and romantic spy adventure, which is not quite the same as romantic suspense, and paranormal romance.
All right, perfect. And finally, Patricia?
I write romances Regina Hart, romantic suspense is Patricia Sargeant, and mysteries as Olivia Matthews.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to throw it out there. Start with you, Quincy, since you've tagged yourself as a cross-genre author. The really easy question: why? Why jump genres to begin with?
So a couple of things. The first was one of my favorite series, and this is going back 35, almost 40 years-ish. The one that really appealed to me was, it's called Many Colored Land by Julian May. And it's basically fantasy sci-fi or sci-fi fantasy, not unlike The Dragon Riders of Pern. And so ever since I was young, the notion of mixing the metaphors, so to speak, really spoke to me. When I got into writing 10, 11, 12 years ago now, contrary to sort of the paradigm of that period, and even to a lesser extent now, I didn't want to get stuck in a genre as an author. And that's mostly because I hate being stuck in any one thing. I get bored easily. I mean, I'm talking to you from my workshop, and I mean, I've got leather working, I've got woodworking, I've got my computer station, I do many things kind of simultaneously. And so it just made sense for me to write that way. I don't know if it was a conscious effort so much as that's just sort of how it turned out. This is how my brain is wired.
All right, perfect. Kathy, what about you? Why write in multiple genres?
Well, I mean, part of it is the same thing Quincy has, is that when you write as fast as I do 5 or 6 books a year, you get bored and you need to stretch. And also every genre has a core message. So in romance, it's love conquers all. In traditional fantasy, it was a coming of age, and so good versus evil. Horror is similar, and in mysteries, it's justice always wins, or
Prevails.
Bad always pays, whatever. I'm really bad at mystery, so that's the one subgenre I don't do. But when you start mixing those, okay, you have to have love conquers all, but also adding in the coming of age. And I mean, I just like playing with stuff like that, and doing those, finding how I can hit the core notes of each genre mixed into one book. If that made any sense at all.
Of course.
Very much so.
All right. Nancy, what about some cons for jumping genres?
Well, I think if you're going to jump genres as opposed to blending them, you really need to keep in mind what readers of the particular genres expect. because originally, before self-publishing got to be a thing, genre labels helped bookstores know which shelf to put the book on. Now that doesn't really matter so much. But I think a reader who picks up a romance, as Kathy said, expects happily ever after. And if you don't deliver happily ever after, then the reader is going to go, this isn't a romance, and assuming it's not on an expensive e-reader, fling it across the room. And then you're done. They're not going to buy another one of your books. So I think it's a problem if you don't really stop and think, am I blending things in this book? Because if I am, then I have to hit the high points of the things I'm blending. Or is this mainly one thing? And I think sometimes people forget about that, and it leads to at least for me, an unsatisfying reading experience.
And then it hits also the marketing. You've got to market to one and not the other. And I 100% agree.
If I could also tap onto what Kathy and Nancy were saying, Nancy brought up the very important point of the bookshelf. And technically, even as self-published authors, you don't have a physical bookshelf, but you still have those algorithms where you feed in your meta tag. So in a way, you still have to be aware of the elements in the genre that you're blending when you do your marketing, as Kathy was saying.
And that kind of brings up a point. You said as self-publishing, is there a difference for you if you're jumping genres and you're being traditionally published?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're traditionally published, your editor's not going to let you go get away with jumping too far from what they bought you as.
Right.
I mean, if they bought you as a suspense author and you want to put a little paranormal in there, they might let you put a little paranormal in there. But if they bought you as a suspense author, they're not going to let you go full science fiction, fantasy, sword and sorcery with a little bit of suspense in it.
Yeah, the big five, or is it four now because somebody else just closed down or is about to, they still, to a large extent, manage their marketing and their business processes to the major categories. Fantasy and sci-fi still combined together.
Yeah.
Romance, etc. Right? I mean, they still look at the world through those deeply partitioned lenses. There are some exceptions, but that's pretty much the way that world ticks. And then you get into the Amazon side, or we'll call the digital side, and that becomes a different animal altogether, which I think lends itself well to more mixing of genres. But to Kathy and the previous point is that you still have to you have to hit that appetite. If it's mystery and romance, then you have to have a good mystery that gets solved and serves the justice desire, as well as the happily ever after. And if you fail there, so I've got a steampunk Western. It's a epic fantasy steampunk Western. Okay, that's a mouthful. It has been a bear to sell in any quantity. When people read it, they love it. But most people are like, well, what is this animal? And they don't know, because the cover looks pretty fantasy. The original cover looked more Western and steampunk. And it's just difficult to find a home for it because it serves all of those needs, but it's kind of, in some respects, I would make the case it's diluted, which is also a risk.
Readers, I think, are getting very keyed into cues. So if the cover has a guy in a kilt on it, well, then it's a historical Scottish. But I was talking to someone about, she has developed her market on clean and wholesome romances, which are different than the word sweet. If you put sweet in, that's a whole different market. And they're just clues in the title. And if you have a dog or a puppy or a cat or some sort of animal on the cover, it means one thing. If there's, if the word sweet is there, it means different things. If it's, what was the other one? There was a key that indicated religious, and
Right.
It wasn't necessarily in the title. It was in the name of the town.
Right.
So if
Yeah.
you couldn't have a place called Sweet Hollow unless your book was a suite. Because if they saw the word sweet there, there's
an expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's like Patricia said, you have to be so keyed into what your metadata is going to say about it. you can have a mystery or suspense set in space. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about jumping genres and crossing genres and blending genres, especially now, whereas, you know, some of the traditional publishers might not have bought it. Readers love it, right? You look at you know, Indiana Jones in space. Yeah, they're all for that, right?
Mhm.
But you still have to do metadata that says this is set in space, which is going to attract a certain audience who's going to search for that keyword. But then you also have to put mystery in there.
Yep.
And so that someone knows. And as Kathy says, a lot of times the cover art is huge to what they're giving you, you know, or what
So
you're
with
giving
this,
them.
we really worked hard. The geeks indicate it's geeks. Where is for the werewolves. The comic book cover is because it's funny. It just, I mean,
Yeah.
there are a zillion, and this was with a publisher. So I went, okay.
Well, and in the digital age, covers sell your books more than anything else, right? You know, there's the old adage, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, actually, these days, more books get bought because of the cover than all of the things combined, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Barring brand recognition.
And we can look at, for instance, Nancy's on her background there. You can tell just by looking at them
What they are.
something of the genres.
Yep.
Do you want to go over them and
Sure.
let us know?
Well, The Herald of Day is historical fantasy with romantic elements, and it's the first book in a trilogy that's set in 3 different time periods. So I went to a bookstore and I looked at all of the books on the shelf that were fantasy with a female protagonist, because I wanted to absorb the vibe of those covers. And then I sent links to those books' pages to my cover designer and said, I want this vibe. Now, that book is set in a period that's not really commonly used, Restoration England, the reign of Charles II. So finding clothing for the model that was not grossly anachronistic was a little bit of a challenge. And so I think if you're going to do something like that, you need a cover designer who's not going to say, well, I've given you 2 possibilities, I'm not making any more changes. Because people who do historical costume pictures frequently label them incorrectly. They just do.
Yep.
And so for Outcast Station, that station was actually designed by Jeanne. And then our cover designer put it into some kind of app metal science fiction-y thingy. And
That would be the technical term.
you know, looking like that. But we knew it's a planet story. Outcast Station is the space station. And there again, we looked at what do books with this kind of story put on the cover. And it's a problem, I think, if you're moving, speaking of metadata, getting back to that rather, if you're moving into romance from other fields, like my paranormal romantic suspense, which currently aren't up because I'm rebranding them, are romance with a heavy suspense element and magic. Now, in my brain, having grown up reading science fiction and fantasy, that's fantasy romance. Paranormal romance is people with telepathy and telekinesis and maybe some ghosts.
And the shifters. Don't forget the shifters.
And the shifters. But as far as the market is concerned, if you are writing a romance with magic that's set in this world, then it's a paranormal romance. Yep. And so that's a matter of knowing, what does the market call this, more than what do I call it in my own teeny little brain? You know, what is it to me versus what is it to the people I want to sell it to? And The Danger's Edge was originally, it's a novella in a 4-novella anthology that Jeanne and I did with Suzanne Farrell and J.D. Tyler. And that's the standalone for it. And it's very much a traditional romantic suspense. It's FBI agent for a secret multinational organization, trouble at the Capitol on inauguration night. And so we looked for...
Oh, don't say those words.
Sorry. So we looked for an image that would indicate that for my story when we pulled it out, because that's not the cover that was on the original anthology. And then the 4th one is the romantic spy adventure. And that's what I call it in the metadata, because traditional romantic suspense is one couple at the forefront of one book. And in the next book, it's a different couple. Your other couple might be supporting characters, but they're not the leads. Well, the man and woman at the top of that cover, their characters are the leads through 7 books and 3 novellas. So I could not call it romantic suspense. And at the same time, it's not a mystery because it's got too much sex in it. I mean, Patricia, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that traditional mystery readers don't want a lot of sex and that kind of thing.
Naughtiness.
Yeah, not traditionally, and definitely not in the cozies that I write.
Yeah. So that's kind of, those covers were, that couple is on the cover of every book in the series, not the novellas, and they're all done that way. And I'm hoping that will say to people, this is the same couple, plus hello, I'm not calling it romantic suspense, which might be a little bit longer answer than anybody wanted, but feel free
That
to
makes
take
sense.
That's perfect. That's what we needed. So to change it up a little bit, Kathy, and I know you as well, Patricia, both of you use pen names. Is that to help keep your audience, keep it separate? Why use a pen name?
Because I started in the dark ages, and pen name, honestly, well, I didn't
I
start at
totally get that.
Harlequin, but there were publishers who required a pen name. Harlequin was one of them. But for me, Jade Lee is my historicals. Kathy Lyons is everything else. And that's because my editor at the time, so back in the dark ages of publishing, so we're talking, I broke in the 90s. You had to break out within about 7 books. And if you didn't, and that was at a second tier publisher. At the primary big prestige publishers, you had about 3 or 4 books to break out. If you didn't break out and they liked you, they said, no problem, give us a new idea and we'll launch you with a new name and try again. So I was at a second tier publisher. I was with Dorchester, which is since gone, Leisure Books. But they gave me 7 books to break out. And so I did not break out. I was doing sweet historicals. And then they said, no, add some sex. So it was like the books were initially written sweet. And then I had to throw in a bedroom scene, and that never worked. But it was awful. Anyway, so that name never broke out. So they said, that's okay, try again. And this is a anecdote. I was with my editor at a conference, and my mother was in Hong Kong. My grandmother had just died, but she had some dementia. So I was getting calls at the conference from my mother saying, do you know what that lunatic woman wanted? She wanted a traditional mourning thing, which was 49 days of crying and then being burned on an auspicious day. Well, she died in August in Hong Kong. And, auspicious days were far away. They couldn't find refrigeration. And my mother had a job, and she was supposed to stay in Hong Kong and cry for 49 days. And that literally is, people come to see the body and you're supposed to go,
Oh, wow.
So my mom was flipping out, and my editor happened to hear me on one of those conversations. And he said, I think you should use your heritage somehow. And so he wanted me to become Asian and use my multicultural heritage. And so that was how Jade Lee was born. Soon, and it was around the time of Jet Li. So I was, Jade Lee spelled a little different. I thought it was cool.
It was.
There we go. Thank you.
And it worked.
It was cool.
And then later on, I'm writing for Harlequin, and my editor called me up and said, marketing believes the Jade Lee name is tainted ethnic. And I said, well, it is an ethnic name. She's like, right. Pick a girl next door named, which I took to mean white as Wonder Bread, and we'll fix it. And so I changed to Kathy Lyons, and without any advertising or anything, I jumped to second slot.
Wow.
Just because all of a sudden people were seeing Jade Lee and going, nope, not reading that. So that was a really long-winded explanation of why I have 2 pen names, which is a pain because you have 2 social media accounts. I've merged my website, but everything else is dual and it's a pain in the butt. So there.
Now making it common knowledge that you have 2, what was behind that? Just that it was a pain and you wanted to
Because I like all my books and I want people who read historicals to also pick up my paranormals.
all right. Patricia, how about you? With pen
Well,
names?
Jason, I'm glad you asked. I did not jump genres. The genres jumped on me. I started as Patricia Sargeant in romantic suspense. And allegedly, the bottom fell out of the romantic suspense market. At least that's what my publisher told me. And they wanted to keep me, but they didn't want me to write romantic suspense. So they moved me over to contemporary romance, hence the jumping genres. But I didn't want to use Patricia Sargeant for books without a dead body. So I took Regina Hart for just a contemporary romance. But I wanted to work my way back to the dead bodies. So I moved into mysteries, and they didn't want me to write the mysteries as Patricia Sargeant because Patricia Sargeant was connected to romance. So I took Olivia Matthews, which takes us back to what Nancy has been saying about the physical shelf and the meta tag, the metadata, because when it's easier to keep the pen names for the different genres when I'm doing the meta tags, because with the mysteries, I don't put Patricia Sargeant or Regina Hart in because those will pull up romances. And a lot of people who read mysteries, they don't want to see romance. So I just use Olivia Matthews for my mystery meta tags and metadata. And unlike Kathy, I was a little too lazy to maintain separate social media, for which was at one point 3 different names. I mean, I'm one person. So I'm sorry, Kathy, I don't have your energy. So I have one website and I have one Facebook and one Twitter.
Trying to haul it all together too. It's
Well,
go ahead, Quincy.
yeah, I think there are still, in some respects, and I'm going to paint with a somewhat wide brush here, so bear with me. But there are a couple of genres that, up to a point, still have the expectation of a gender-based or androgynous name. When you talk about, because I'd actually considered, and I tried writing romance bordering on the naughty romance, and I had a name set up for it, Casey Villain. So here's the thing: if you saw my picture and Quincy Allen on a romance book, I'd wager really good odds that would not do very well, with a lot of reasons, right? It's like, no, this dude is not going to write my romance book.
Put a picture up of your dog.
Exactly, right? And so it's in romance that still holds true up to a point, and I get it, right? And there's up to a point the target market, there's a match. The same thing actually in some respects unfortunately still applies on the sci-fi, specifically military sci-fi thing that is generally read by mostly, young guys or up to middle-aged guys. And so that being written by a woman, perceived as written by a woman, is not as frequently picked up. Now I happen to write, so I'm in the Chris Kennedy Publishing, and they've got the Four Horsemen universe. You've got there's Casey, there's several women who write, and everybody knows they're women, and it is a non-issue in that they still write it, everybody picks it up, it doesn't apply. But as a market perspective, I believe that still applies, especially in the military sci-fi.
Where you get the initials, J.S. Harker or,
Correct, right? And that makes it easy. Now, technically, Quincy Allen is a pen name. I'm going to be changing it to my legal name, hopefully this year. Again, the last year has messed up a lot of things. But I'd actually gotten into this because I thought I might end up doing other genres. And if that were the case, like I said, romance in particular, because even back then it was hot, and it will always be, I think. I wanted a separate name for that, and so I would have managed those separately. I haven't really had to because I have so many projects now under Quincy that it's worked out.
And I don't have a pen name for all the reasons you all have mentioned. Not only would I have to manage the website and the social media, but I would have to keep it straight in my head.
Yeah.
And I would have to remember which face am I supposed to be wearing today? And I just thought, I'm just not going to do it. And I don't know whether that's been a successful strategy or not, because you can't go look down the road not taken and see what would have happened had you gone that way.
Yeah.
I did a signing once where a very stylish 20-something young Black man was selling his books. And on the right side were books aimed at the middle grade girls, and the titles were the girls' names. So Alicia and Kendra and whatever. And, you know, it perfectly normal middle grade books. You look to the left and it was his series Legs Wide Open.
Well, right then.
And it was all the same name. And I asked him about that. And he's like, well, it's all me. And he said that, you know, you look at the covers and you know the difference. And whenever a little kid came up and looked to the other side of the table, he would actually grab, you know, the girl. It was usually a girl, and he would grab her hands and put her on the other side. Yeah. While the mothers, he'd go, you know, down over there, moms.
Well, it's interesting that in this business, there are as many paths to success as there are successful writers. I mean, there's not a panacea that kind of is the one way that everybody should be taking. And I mean, I kind of respect his methodology. He understands the sorts of people that are going to be coming to that table. Because I started working conventions back in 2009 in various forms. And so you understand, and that's why I had a variety of books. When somebody came up, I would ask essentially, so what do you like to read? That was the catch-all. And if they said, well, I like sci-fi. Well, so my sci-fi mystery noir that takes place in LA will fit your appetite. If they said, I like Westerns, okay, steampunk fantasy Western. And so there's that strategy you use to do your best to put a book in the hand of everybody who comes by the table. It's a schlepping kind of job.
I used to do booth work at Comic-Cons, and same thing.
So that kind of leads into another question. Does that dilute your ability to grow your audience? If you've got 5 different books in 5 different genres, does that slow your progress? I mean, obviously it's worked out for you because you've got so many books now, but
I do not have the readership of Stephen King.
I think in many respects, yes, it does dilute it because fans, when you look at market share, fantasy readers to a large extent still read just fantasy. That's what they're looking for. Sci-fi readers the same way, Westerns, etc. I think that paradigm, especially since Amazon has taken up so much market share, I think that has changed how people look at books. And so it's been gradually changing, which I'm very happy for. It puts folks like me in a better position than we've been in before. But yeah, for the most part, still, the guys who buy fantasy are looking for the doorstop with the wizard on the cover. And that's it. It's hard to get them to read an alien ex-government assassin who's trying to solve a murder mystery in modern Los Angeles. Hard to sell to that crowd.
My first agent said, not only do you need to sit on the same bus, you need to sit on the same seat of the same bus for your first 20 books. And then once that's established, then broaden out.
Yeah, and that's very sort of well, for the most part, very traditional publishing. It's that mindset. And from a business perspective, they've been very successful at it. Right? It makes sense.
I have too much pretty shiny to, it was very hard for me to stay concentrated.
I think that if you could manage to release multiple books in a year, you could get a foothold in your market if you go between 2 or 3 different series. Like if you have your cozy mystery series, your romance series, your sci-fi series. I think it depends on how many books you're able to release in a year.
Would you all agree that in this market now, particularly with the advent of digital, that having it used to be that every year you needed a new book in the trilogy, right? Once a year. That's actually been reduced to more like between 2 and 6 months for the next book in this series, as far as feeding your readers' need.
I think it depends on what your readers are expecting. If you set them up to expect rapid releases, then the person in the mirror is the person you need to have the long talk with. But if you could set them up to expect something every 6 months, then you might be in a better position.
Okay.
How often are your releases, Nancy?
Well, that's actually brings up something that it's a do as I say, not as I do, because I had the issues that Kathy was talking about. Oh, shiny. And the thing about independently publishing is there's nobody who's going to say, I don't care if it's shiny, do this, And so what I ended up with, except for the Mages series, was a hybrid series. It was partly published by a New York publisher and partly published by me, and that's why it's going to be rebranded, so they'll all be uniform. So there are 6 books in that series. There are not 6 books in any other series. And it's hard to promote a series if you have not very many books in it. And so learn from my mistake and get at least 3 books done in a series quickly. Now, if you can do other series at the same time and get them all out together, more power to you. I can't do that.
And I'm jealous and I hate you.
That too. So I do the historical fantasy are under contract for Falstaff, and there are 2 of those in the pipeline right now. And I found that life happened and I could not produce the books as fast as I had hoped to. And so I would have been better off had I made a contingency plan called, if life happens and you can't produce the books this quickly, do this. So I do a Kingdom Castle novella every year. I try to do another book every year. That's not really enough. And I need to sort of ramp that up a bit so that people know that they can count on something. I've been very scattershot, and that's really truly not the best way to go about it.
Print publishers used to, and nowadays, the most I've ever heard is that they will put you out twice a year. That's traditional print publishing. But with the advent of e-publishing and all of this, the people who are making the bet, they're grabbing their audience, holding it, and growing it rapidly, are producing new content every 2 to 3 weeks. And I mean, obviously you can't write, no one can write that fast. So I've seen different strategies for that. The smartest, in my opinion, is to hold back everything. And then once it's all written, then you release the series 1 a month at most, or 1 every 2 to 3 weeks, whatever works. Or you'll drop 3 and then wait a month, whatever the strategy is. But you need 6 to 10 books in your series to do that. Other ways, you can do a shared world with friends. So you drop a book 1 every 2 months, and your friend who's also in the same world drops a book 1 every 2 months, and you stagger them. There's that. Or you can do short stories and novellas or drop. But if you want, especially in e-publishing, and if you're doing Kindle Unlimited, or depending on your primary market, faster, we are a content hungry world. And if you want your readers to hang with you, you need to give them something to read every, 2 to 3 weeks. And I can't do that. So
So that actually gives me a perfect segue. I'd said at the beginning I have to step out because of another meeting. That's exactly the meeting I'm going to. I'm working with 5 authors. We are creating a shared world. It's with Chris Kennedy Publishing. And if you haven't looked it up, take a look at it's the Four Horsemen universe. Chris Kennedy and his writing partner, Mark Wandry, have been immensely successful with exactly what you're talking about. He releases one book about every 3 weeks, and it's all in one IP. It's a variety of different authors. It's an interesting model because the readers gobble up. It's military sci-fi, and they get their. It's like serving up crack, really. They get hit their fix every 3 to 4 weeks with at least the same universe, if not a lot of the same characters. And you have, at last count, I think they had 60 authors, and I'm
right off the mark to the end. And sometimes it's hard to write 7,000 words and stop, but it's also good discipline.
Hey, Nancy, I'm sorry. You want to
go, I need to get this down to 7,000 words. And how am I going to do that? And then, as Kathy says, it lets you release things faster, even if you can't release them as fast as you might like to. I mean, I can't write short stories as fast as I would like to because there's that whole make it tight and keep it moving.
Hey, Nancy.
I have a tendency to pace it like I'm writing a novel. And then I have to go back and go, this is not a novel. It needs to start a lot faster. But it is another way to get more material out than if you were depending exclusively on novels.
Hey, Nancy, can you hear me this time?
What?
So we're going to back you all the way up before you started that entire part of the conversation, because when I was trying to let Jeannie in, I bumped the pause button.
I hate you. So
yeah, I saw it stop recording for a second. Like, please let that just be something I didn't see.
You want me to start with about picking up on what Kathy said about short stories?
Yep. So I'll hide myself and go away again.
Well, since you had to erase a thing where I got up and went to the door, I'll forgive you.
I think we found where she's going to use the
Yeah, except he might leave it in to play a trick on me, and then I would be in trouble because that's not my brand. You ready for me to start?
No, I got to hide myself, but at least I dumped my happy face in here so I would know where to find it. So,
okay. All right. Well, I'd like to pick up on what Kathy was saying about short stories, which is that a lot of people can write a short story faster than they can write a novel. And we all, well, and you know, a lot of people can, but we all know people, I'm sure, who go, oh, short story, I'm just going to knock that puppy right out. And they forget that a short story has to be really tight and it has to move right along. There can't be these big lags. You know, I was writing one the other day and I'm thinking, well, you know, these characters were from one of the novels and readers would like to know how they're doing. And this is how many children they've had. And then it's like, no, that doesn't belong in here, you know? And so I think people sometimes forget that a short story has to be really, really tight. And I think it's good discipline to give yourself a word limit. I'm not highly successful at that, but I think it's good discipline to say, I'm going to write 7,000 words. And then if I end up with 8, I'm going to figure out how to cut it down to 7. So it's still real tight. But, you know, I don't think readers care as long as it's a good story and it moves right along and they enjoy reading it. I really don't. But, you know, it is one alternative to putting more material out there than you could put out if you were solely writing novels. My problem is I tend to start it like I'm writing a novel and roll on along, and then I have to go back and fix it.
Now, with that, would you suggest to someone that's looking to jump genres to first do a short story in the genre? No?
Jump in however you want to jump in. If your idea is a rock opera, then just sit down and start rocking it out. If your idea is a short blog, I mean, if you're going to jump genres, you have to practice it anyway. So practice, I mean, it's, at least I've always, whenever I started in a new genre, a new format, the first one I put together was a word that I can't say.
But that actually raises something else about that, which is if you're going to jump genres, don't jump into a genre you've never read.
Oh,
I went to
please.
lunch with a woman one time who said that she wanted to write a romance because they were easy to sell and then they sold a lot. And I said, well, do you read romance? Who are the authors that you read? And she said, oh, I don't read it.
Hard
So
to type while holding your nose.
yeah, it's like, do your homework. If you're going to jump genres, do your homework, read the people who are in it. When I decided to write romance, I went into a Walden Books. We used to have those once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, and looked at the people who had more than one book on the shelves. And I bought at least one book by all of those people because I thought these people are successful. And so I need to see how they did it. And I read those books to see how they structured their stories. And it's not just the stories in any genre, it's also how do you present the characters? What about the characters do you emphasize? And too many people, I think, decide, well, you know, I've read some of this and I like it and I'm just going to write it. And you might succeed that way, but I don't think your odds are as good as they would be if you prepped a little.
And I think too that if you want to switch genres, start with writing some fan fiction and see how you even like it before you commit yourself to a novel. Now, unfortunately for me, I never had that, you know, the idea came full blown and I just dove in, you know. But as Nancy said, sometimes you read in that genre, even if you don't write in that genre. And suddenly one day an idea comes up and you're like, well, let's explore that.
See, just like with Jeannie, the story, the character just came to me. And that's how I moved from contemporary romance over to the cozy mystery. There was already a story in me for that. And I'm working on a science fiction fantasy. There's already a story, actually it's a trilogy, in me for that. So I don't really understand when people say, oh, I want to jump genres, so I'm just going to write a short thing. Well, is that short thing already in you, or is there a full story in you? I don't understand.
I don't think you can force fit it. I mean, like Nancy's example, I mean, if you don't read romance, do not, whatever you do, try to sit down and write one. Go read a bunch before you do. I absolutely, totally second what Nancy said. And I used to work at Walden Books in a galaxy far, far away, and be Dalton's. But, you know, I wouldn't try to write a mystery I love mystery and I love to read them, but my brain doesn't entirely work in the solving as much it does in the committing, which is why I tend to write romantic suspense. Yeah. Well, it's like Patricia said earlier, there's a body on the floor. There's usually a lot of bodies on the floor. And, you know, I can't write a book without, a friend of mine said one time that if it doesn't have a gallon of blood and a couple of bodies in the first chapter, it's not your book. It's not a book you wrote. And that's pretty true. But, you know, there's also that aspect of if it's something you've always wanted to try, give it a shot. You know, I can have a body on the floor in Regency, England, too. I haven't ever been moved to try that.
You know, that's how we ended up writing Outcast Station, because we had both been to a science fiction convention and had sat in on a panel on space opera. And we were talking on the phone and I said, you know, I really kind of want to try my hand at space opera. And Jeannie said, really? Me too. Let's do it together. And so having somebody else to bounce it off of really helped, I think, me at least, stay within the confines of that genre. And there's no sex in this book. There doesn't need to be any sex in this book, and readers wouldn't like it if there were. So the focus is on other things. The focus is on the world. And we both read a lot of it. And so we got the advantage of what each other had read, not just what we had read, and could say, well, you know, in this series, this is a really big series and they didn't do it this way. Let's think about how we're going to do this.
Right.
And I do think you have to put some thought into it if you're going to write a genre you've never written before. And especially, and what I said about don't write a romance if you haven't read it applies for every genre. because they're, again, reader expectations.
Oh, truly.
Let me add in that I don't tend to have bodies on the floor. I have adventure, not the bodies.
I need the bodies. I need them.
My sister, yes, absolutely. Put the
So,
bodies hit the floor, man.
Patricia,
Jason.
since you've got 3 different pen names, I'm assuming it's come up at some point where you will be writing in one genre, editing in another genre, marketing in another genre. What?
It's horrible, Jason. It's horrible.
Kill your sister.
So tell us a little bit about that then.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. But one of the things that I tried to do, if you're asking about process, is I'll write one name in the morning, exercise, believe it or not, I do, and then the second, another name in the evening. And then if I really need like to do something for the third name, it'll be really, really late. But I try to pick them up.
Mental
Morning.
separation.
Yes, yes. And the exercising works because it really hurts. And so it clears the mind.
Pain as a
Afterwards,
Process.
for me.
Pain is process, yes.
all right. How about the rest of you? Do you find that causes issues with you? Is it as horrible for you as?
It's horrible. I can't do what she does, splitting my days. I have to do one project at a time. And when I hit up against deadlines, I just had to switch out of Regency England to contemporary funny geeks werewolves. And it's, but I just have to write fast then and get through it and then shift gears. I do the whole thing at once. I can't split my days. I admire people who have the brain space to do that.
I'm kind of the odd duck there in that if I get stuck on one, I can shift to the other and it will kick everything loose
Isaac
for whatever it was I
Asimov
was
did
working
that.
on. Well, go Isaac.
Mom. So you're in good company.
I am in good company. And, I got to say, one of the things that's been super fun about the book Nancy and I wrote together, the Outcast Station series. First of all, it was so much stinking fun to do this together because we built this world together. And what's not to love about going, hey, Nancy, how about I make this alien? And she's like, another alien? Okay. But there's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but when you become creative in one area, you become creative in all areas. And sometimes when something is really kicked into gear, like when Nancy and I were building the Outcast Station world and we were working on our separate stories and we were talking almost every day about what was going on, because the way the stories, especially in Welcome to Outcast Station, they sort of dovetail in time. And you don't have to read them together with that in mind, but we wanted to make sure we weren't screwing anything up for the other story. So that synergy kicked all sorts of things loose, and I was incredibly productive in the other genres that I write because I was being so productive in that one. So it enabled my brain space a little bit in that respect.
But for me, it's not the way it is for you, because not with Outcast Station, but just in general. If I'm working along on a project and I feel like I'm slogging through molasses and I get the idea for this new shiny thing over here, for me, that is a symptom of avoidance. That is a gateway to procrastination. And if I go chase that nice shiny thing and I don't finish my slog through this acre of molasses, then when I get back into the molasses, it's like it's congealed and it's harder to get through it than it was before. And so having an idea for a new shiny idea over here is a lot like thinking, the shower probably needs to be cleaned right now. That kind of thing. So, everybody has their process and it works differently for each of us.
Yeah. With the molasses, you see, when I get stuck in the molasses, I just call Nancy and go, I'm stuck. What do I do now?
Nancy,
Or-
give your
or-
phone number.
Well, the other thing I do is I blow something up or kill somebody. I may not keep it in the story, but I
These does it
always-
too.
blow someone up or something up. That was a little Freudian. I blow somebody up.
I believe on that note, we will go ahead and end the panel. But before we go away, I do want to have everyone go around and let us know where to find you on the internet. And we'll start again with you, Jeannie.
You can find me at jeanneadams.com. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, but mostly Twitter because I spend way too much time there. And you can find me here on Continual.
All right, Kathy.
I am here, Kathy Lyons, kathylyons.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, but I spend most of my time on Facebook, except I'm in a must finish the revision hole, so I'm not allowed on Facebook right now. But I'm also at jadeleeauthor.com, but it's the same website, so it's easier to think of just Kathy Lyons.
All right, perfect. Nancy.
Well, you can find me at nancynorthcott.com. I do have a Facebook page, Nancy Northcott Author, which I go to every once in a while. I spend far more time on Twitter than is good for me. So it's easiest to find me there where I'm at Nancy Northcott. And I have a Pinterest page that I have lots of good intentions about doing something with.
All right, and finally, Patricia.
I'm at patriciasargeant.com. I'm also on Facebook. I have an author page and a chatty page. And I'm on Twitter stalking Jeannie and Nancy a lot because they're funny.
All right.
We
Perfect.
stalk you right back.
All right. I do thank you guys for coming in, and I thank everyone for watching. We'll see everyone next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.